This is a brief summary of the topics that we discussed on previous Monday. We started the first part of the course, which is a comparison between law and religion on the level of their rules or their norms. The specific outcomes of this first part, or at least of this first chapter, is to familiarize you with the concept of rules or norms, then to apply syllogism, also to compare legal and religious rules, to identify the major sources of law, to introduce you to law in general, and to observe the points of contact between law and religion. Here you can find the outline of the whole part 1, and then a focus on chapter 1. This document, which you see in front of you, is already uploaded on e-learning as a PDF. So here we start with chapter 1, comparing legal and religious rules or norms. The first section would focus on the common characteristics of all rules, and the second section will focus on the differences between religious and legal rules. So section 1, common characteristics. These common characteristics are the generality of the norm and its hypothetical structure. However, before we start into these, we will begin with an introduction. We define what is a norm, so we know what we are talking about, what is normative discourse, and finally the two notions of deduction and induction related to any discussion about norms. So what is a norm? I asked your colleagues, and I ask you right now, to go to a dictionary, whether a paper or online, and research in it these two words, norm and rule. You will find a plethora of definitions, lots of definitions for each. However, the way we are going to define norm is a principle of right action binding upon the members of a group and serving to guide, control, or regulate proper and acceptable behavior. Of course, as the course will move on, you will end up by understanding each of these elements. We are going to define rule also as a prescribed guide for conduct or action, a regulating principle. So the way we are going to understand norm and rule is that both have lots of common, so we're going to use them as synonyms, because we are going to focus on their main characteristic, which is the normative discourse. Now, whatever rule, whether it be religious or legal or grammatical or mathematical or whatever, every rule is normative. So what do we mean by normative discourse or the normative characteristic? A normative discourse can be best understood if we compare it with a descriptive discourse. A descriptive discourse aims at describing something, and therefore we can say about it if it's true or untrue. If I say the earth is square, you will tell me no, that's an untrue statement, an incorrect statement, a statement that does not correspond to truth. If I tell you that 1 plus 1 equals 2, you are going to tell me, yes, this is a true statement. A normative discourse is a discourse that cannot be judged whether it conforms to truth or no, because it is a discourse that prescribes a norm. It commands a certain behavior, like do this, don't do that, don't smoke, don't walk on the road, don't raise your voice, etc. So this is a normative discourse, and this discourse is particular then to norms. When we speak about rules or norms, we are specifically talking about descriptive discourse and not the normative discourse, not the descriptive, because we are prescribing norms. I hope this point is clear, so we move on to the next point. The role of normative and descriptive discourse in the scientific methodology. You can see on the screen an illustration showing the different steps of a scientific methodology. Now, this methodology uses both description and descriptions that will end up by creating or identifying a norm. In law, we don't use descriptive discourse much. This is quite a detailed discussion and debate among legal scientists themselves, legal scholars, themselves, whether law is a science or no, whether law follows the scientific method or no. However, we will not go into these discussions, just so that you know that in general, law uses more, or law does not need descriptive discourse in order to identify a norm, because the norm is already there. We are given the norm in the different sources of law. We are going to study these sources later on. If all of this seems a bit confusing to you, don't worry. It's not a major part of our course. It will not hinder your ability to understand what will follow. A more important notion would be to distinguish between deduction and induction. These are two logical methods or logical processes that we are going to use a lot during this semester. Deduction begins by a general rule which will apply on a particular case. So the movement of thought in deduction goes from the general to the particular. We are given a general rule, we apply it on a particular case. This logical method works not only in law but in every other domain, whether it be grammar or religion or ethics or whatever. We are given a general rule, we apply it on a particular case. If I'm going to take an example from law, for instance, you should not park where it is illegal to park, or else you will get fined. This is a general rule. You will get fined if you park in illegal spots. If X goes and park in front of, let's say, blocking a certain road, then X has parked where he should not park and will be fined by application of the general rule. On the slide you can find another example taken from, let's say, the medical field, or at least the ethical field. If you are in a public place, you should put your mask, especially in this condition, in our condition of COVID and flu, etc. If I want to go to a concert, that would be a particular application of the general rule, and therefore I should put my mask in the concert. Induction, on the other hand, goes from the particular to the general. So here we don't have the general rule, we will have to find it by observing particular cases. I go on studying or observing many particular cases in order to find the general rule that explains them. For instance, Newton was observing many particular cases. He was observing all these fruits that were falling off the trees. So he observed the first one, the second one, third one, fourth one, and then he was able to induce a general rule stating that every object let alone will fall down, which means there is a law of gravity, a general law of gravity. So keep in mind this distinction. In deduction, the movement of thought goes from the general to the particular, while in induction, the movement of your thought goes from the particular to the general.